All right, let's bring in labor analyst Mamokgethi Molopyane now about the lessons learned and what those tragic events changed about the labor market. Thank you so much for making time, Mamokgethi. Reflecting on the events of August 2012, how did that tragic incident influence labor relations in the country? Has the balance of power shifted amongst trade unions?
No, not really, Clement. Good afternoon to you. It hasn't really shifted. It almost continues to be what it has been. Yes, it was a very public spectacle that happened, but gradually over time, it has moved away from being a public thing to the norm sort of retaining in terms of how unions engage with employers, in terms of how the business of negotiations go about. So that perhaps is one of the things that has remained in place. It is sad, really, Clement, and regrettable that not much has changed. But also it has forced workers to, in a way, they continue to be further divided amongst themselves. Those who are for one union, NUM, those who are for AMCU, and in terms of their different strategy and how they approach negotiations moving forward. And on the part of employer, not really. Yes, engagement have tried to be more accommodating, and the employers and the employees are negotiating in such a way that they hope the event does not happen or there's no repetition of it. But ultimately, when you look at the past round of negotiations that happened, it's always going to be contested, it's conflictual. The workers are asking for higher wages, better wages, or as they call it, a living wage, and the employer will always say we cannot afford it. But also, do not forget, we are mining industry that's part of the global commodities, and we are affected by changes that are happening globally. So the wages that you are asking for, we cannot afford. On the other hand, the workers will always say, but hang on, we deserve a better wage. We should be remunerated better. We should have a safe working environment. So it's always going to be very contested, but also very political.
Yeah, so it looks like the unions in their demands, and they're more informed by research that they do and less about politics. I'm glad you've touched on what you've observed from the side of the bosses, right, the mining companies, because the question we've been asking is, did that incident actually force them to almost review how proportionality is applied at the negotiating table? Because the striking workers during Marikana, the minority unions didn't necessarily have bargaining rights. And I'm looking at the statement that COSATU sent out this afternoon, and they're saying what happened in 2012 basically represented the beginning of the intense offensive against collective bargaining that continues to this day.
Yes, some can argue that indeed, and not just in mining industry, that collective bargaining has come under pressure, even when you look at the public sector, how the talks have gone about. So workers are always going to be to feel that the negotiating process are under attack because the employer is trying to shift the goalpost, so to speak, in order to maximize the different rounds of negotiations for themselves. And that, of course, means that now workers have to come with new tactics of how to approach negotiations. But although in going into negotiations, workers are becoming more informed by research. They have always been, by the way, but now they are. When they move forward, they are looking at, for example, in mining, the impact of technology in the industry. How is it going to affect them? What kind of worker is it affecting? Who are their members? And how are they going to regroup themselves moving forward such that they are able to take advantage of or to mitigate the risk that could be posed by technological change to their members, but also to the industry? Equally so, Clement, at the same time, mining companies are always going to say, we play in a global field. In order to remain competitive, we have to make our production agile, we have to make our workforce agile, but also we have to increase productivity, and we have to embrace new ways of mining. And so in this contest of modernization versus old ways of mining versus where does that leave the workers and what kind of worker is left behind, that changes in both sides. The tactics completely change.
Yeah, and they need to look at the implications for the sector and their workers. Do you get a sense that government is committed to the developmental agenda of mining communities? In other words, are mining companies as well committed to their social responsibility as well? Because this is 9 years later, and there's still not much that has changed, right? It is 9 years of searching for answers, 9 years of searching for closure, of yearning for justice, and yet the conditions remain the same for mine workers.
Yes, well, one could argue and say 9 years is just part of. This has been going on for a while. And so are you asking if the impact that the companies or mining industry itself has had on South Africa in terms of changing the communities or in terms of the social programs helping the communities? To some extent, some have, but realistically, not really. If you look at mine hosting communities, I'm in the Northwest at the moment, in a village called Fafun, which is my hometown, just around it, out at the outskirts of it in Breads, there are a couple of mines. And when you look at the communities around it, their lives has not changed very much. The conditions has not improved very much. So would we say then that mining activity in that area has positively impacted their lives? Absolutely not. Has it, in a sense, created jobs for others? Yes, possibly. But is that sustainable in terms of developing local economy activity in that area? Not really, because local governments are failing themselves to come on board, not just in the Northwest, throughout the country, in communities that have mining activities. And that becomes a challenge in the sense that what the anticipation of the workers, the anticipation of the communities are neither met by the mining industry that is supposed to have some sort of social initiative for the community, but also not met by government that to an extent has completely failed mine hosting community. And it's the topic we often run away from in South Africa, that in terms of being the principal, the regulator of the industry, but also in terms of being the guardian of the country's natural resources, and as a government that says it is a developmental state pursuing to improve the conditions of its people, really it has not taken advantage of the resource wealth that it has. But understandably so, because, I mean, when you look at it, do we have characteristics of a developmental state? Some would argue, say yes, others would say no. And that, of course, factoring also into place the fact that there are always going to be politics around mining, around the history of mining, around the impact the industry has, how it has shaped the economy, and moving on forward. For as long as that remains, I think it's always going to be a highly contested field. How do we then perhaps move forward? That is the challenge. And I think unions and workers are beginning to realize that in as much as they are part of a ruling alliance with their labor federations, or however way they connect with the ruling party, they are not really going to realize what they need, because they are, in a way, different classes. They now the ruling elite, and the workers remain the working class. And if you move forward, the interests are going to always be divergent, importantly so because now we know that even with regulation, even in government, the ANC-led government has completely struggled to uplift the living conditions of people around the mines and mine workers and the workers in general.
Yeah, Mamokgethi, really appreciate your time on the lead on ENCA this afternoon. Mamokgethi Molopyane, Labour Analyst.